All right.
All right, we'll call the order the Joint Review Board meeting of Tuesday, August 29th. We'll take roll call. Diana's here. Chad Weininger.
Here.
Mike Stango.
Here.
Bob Matthews.
Here.
Brent Weicker.
Yep. Here.
So then move to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the consent.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, take it.
All approved? All
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
I said it wrong. All right. For, number 2 on the agenda, consideration with possible action and adoption of an allocation amendment to the project plan for Tax Increment Financing District 12, TID 12, which is from the I-43 Industrial Park pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 86.1105.
I have a
Yep.
procedural question.
Yes.
If this is, okay, so I apologize. If this is an organizational meeting, so this is the one that we're just doing for organizational, right?
No, we had the meeting to review the annual review, the new thing that's required by the state.
Okay.
So we had that at the end of July. And on that one, we elected appointed citizen member and appointed a chair.
Okay, so that was your organization.
Correct.
For this.
For this process.
For
And
this
we-
TID.
Correct, and we discussed, here's some things that we wanted to do. Last month, our council passed a resolution, or authorized RDA to look at basically closing 3 TIDs, allocating for TID 12, and creating through 3 new TIDs.
Okay.
So just given the timing in terms of where they're coming on, the only ones that are time sensitive for this year, for 2017, is the allocation amendment for 12.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
That's perfect.
Okay, does that make more sense?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, sorry, Chuck was at the last one, I think you were out, that's,
Yeah,
Up to
okay.
speed.
This all makes sense now.
okay.
Otherwise, I'm like, well,
But where are we?
this
right.
doesn't make.
So to clarify, what is it that we're trying to accomplish today? I mean, I
Sure.
know that we're looking at the District 12, but you talked about consolidation, which is what we talked about last time,
Yep,
and adding 3, and so 19 is the first of the 3 that you're
correct.
recommending.
So we had talked about closing 3, closing TID 6, which is Navarino, closing TID 11, which is Old Main, and closing TID 15, which is Old North. In order to do that, we had talked about allocating money from TID 12 in order to close those 3, and then creating 3 new ones. We had talked about East Town Mall,
Mhm.
East Mason area, the Shipyard, and Whitney School. Those are the 3 that we had talked about creating. In terms of what, and so those, based on that meeting, that was presented to RDA. RDA had some discussion about those types of things, and in that process, they made a recommendation that council appoint RDA in place of Plan Commission to
Mhm.
hold the public hearings and conduct all the acts. So council did that at their August meeting. In terms of what we'd like to do that's effective 1/1 of 17, we would like the allocation amendment for TID 12, and we'd like to create TID 19, which is East Town. As far as the other 2, Shipyard and Whitney School, because there will be new projects coming online 1/1 of 18, we have some time, so we'd like to create those and have them effective 1/1 of 18.
So, I apologize.
Yep.
Madam Chair, if we, I guess, approve the allocation for TID 12, which I'm assuming you're going to go through.
Yep.
Are we at the same time going to be closing down 6, 11, and 15 at the same time?
Those will be done in 2018, but in order to do so, we wanted to see if JRB and council had the appetite to do that in order to allocate those funds, because if they don't allocate those funds, then we need to figure out another way to
Another
close
funding
them down or
structure.
source of funding for that.
Perfect. Okay.
So that's kind of the timing or how we're putting them together.
So this is just a validation of, are we willing to use
Correct.
the proceeds of 12 to essentially fund the closure of
Correct.
the other 3?
So we go through this process right now and saying, look, but 12, will you allocate some funds towards the closure of these 3? Today, we're talking about it. There's a public hearing with RDA on Thursday, then it goes to council to adopt it. If they adopt it or approve it, it comes back to here for final approval. If that's finally approved, then we'll start the process to close those 3.
Okay.
If not, then we have to have some more discussion. I
Right,
think there was
figure out how to
interest in
fund it.
closing those, but then how we're going to fund the outstanding expenses for that.
Right, got it, thank you.
So I talked a little bit last time about allocation amendment for TID 12 and for what those funds would be used. Just presented some language and dug into the numbers. I had some preliminary numbers last time about how much it would cost to close 3 and what we'd be looking at for allocations. Right now, we would ask that up to $200,000 be used to close tax increment district number 6,
If you
which
look
is
at the
Old
back,
North.
back of the single page, it has this information on.
Yep, I'm sorry,
This
yeah,
one
flip
here.
that over.
Thank you.
Yep, that included the original TID 12 plan from 2005 if you wanted to review it for your reference. Up to $200,000 to close TID 6, which is the Old North area. That's an area we had talked about. We had talked about some preliminary development up there. Nothing has really happened. We haven't had much increment, we haven't had much loss. It's been pretty stale. Our calculations show that there's right now about $176,000 of outstanding obligations. And basically what we're looking at is just any remaining debt service that's out there.
And when is this scheduled to close, Kevin?
TID 6 right now is scheduled to close. Actually, I think it's right. TID 6 right now is scheduled to close in 2028.
Okay.
So if we closed it next year, we'd be doing it 10 years early.
Okay,
Do you know how much increment is there?
In TID 6, it's actually just slightly less. It's about,
Oh, this is, so you have 2 TIDs that are in decrement right now,
3.
right?
correct.
And this is-
I'm sorry, I take that back. It went down a little between 2015 and 2016. There is still some increment, but it's only about 1.2 million.
Okay. Hey, the county will take whatever it can get.
Well, and that's one of the things we looked at in terms of just as the city has acquired some properties and/or some have been taken off. Now Procter & Gamble made a purchase, so some of those are going back on the tax roll.
Oh,
But
okay.
there's not really anything else going on. So before we start, or somebody starts tearing more houses down and losing more value in that area, we kind of want to stop any type of bleeding. But right now, there's about, 1.2 million worth of increment in that district. The second one would be allocating up to $350,000 to tax increment finance district number 11, which is Old Main Street. That one has the greatest loss in it. Technically, it would qualify as a distressed TID district because it's been more than 10% off the last 2 years. And that right now, there's about a $5 million loss in terms of when that TID was created in 2005 and where it's at today. That TID is set to expire in 2032. That is one, just in terms of bad timing, the TID district was created in order to help fund some improvements, including road reconstruction, East River Trail. With that, the city has acquired some property for the trail. The school district's acquired some property along that area, which, look, I mean, has been good in terms of getting people and employees there, but not really good in terms of property taxes and taking some things off the roll.
So was it created just to do that, to do some?
Yeah, and also just,
Recreational.
it's some redevelopment. I think as we were looking at, there are a number of TIDs created during that time, between 2005 and 2006. It was the same year, actually, I-43 was created, and they're looking at, they kind of saw Main Street as a potential redevelopment area. And looking, kind of the early planning for the East River Trail, looking to balance the trail, also driving some development. Look, the property acquisition, demo, the trail construction has taken longer than anticipated because you're parceling together lots of individual parcels. And with that, the projects that have gone in have been the school districts. So in terms of what they've again, it's good that they're bringing people there and then, you know, taking over some vacated properties, but it hasn't brought any tax increment with it. There was some discussion at RDA, whether or not you'd want to consider going through the process of reassessment and declaring this a distressed one.
What's the benefit?
So the benefit is, I mean, you basically get to reset your base value. And,
Push off the taxes to everyone else.
right,
Mhm.
and so basically Tech College County, I mean, everyone takes a hit in terms of, look, you say that, you know, those taxes that we thought we were gonna get are gone. Now, if it comes back to where the original base value was, I mean, you're kind of back to square one. I guess just from a pure development perspective, we don't really have any projects in the queue right now that would say, look, let's do it, because we've got, you know, $10 million worth of value coming on and we get right back up there. It's just, it's a sluggish area for the most part right now. I mean, I think there's some great businesses and then things are
Right.
going well and some activity, but nothing monumental in terms of development. And I think my concern would be is if you declared it distressed and any more things came down, I mean, you're just right back where you are right now. And so I think that would be the more appropriate thing, which we talked about in possible new TID for Whitney School, is that if you closed this one, Whitney School could perhaps take some projects that may be in the queue, maybe overlapping with that. But as far as the district itself, the rest of the stretch, there's nothing really ripe
Mhm.
at the moment.
Thank you.
And then I'm sorry, I got the two confused. When I was talking about TID 6, that was actually Navarino, and I was juxtaposed it with Old North. Old North is where Procter & Gamble has come on and taken some properties. That's basically an area north of the transit center along Webster. The first one, Eastside Navarino, that was done around NeighborWorks, where NeighborWorks went into their facility and did some rehab of housing, new park in that Navarino neighborhood. With Old North, that's the one we're talking about. The houses, the city RDA has acquired some, done some demolitions. As I said, Procter & Gamble's picked up a few parcels, but there hasn't been anything really going in there. In that tax district, that is also one that has lost some value. It's not quite distressed yet, but it's about 4 million or 4.7 million down from where it originally was. That one we have seen just based on some projections. The fund balance is getting drained in that one. And I think now is the time. Again, you could potentially wait a year and look at a reassessment, but there's no planned projects in that area in the foreseeable future. And I think it would be wise to end it before that fund balance keeps getting drained down. With that, that would need up to $150,000. The balance on that right now would be about $112,000 we see to close. So the elements or the amendments have a cap of about $700,000 of up to, but the actual cash needed to close will probably end up being about $650,000 or less. This is just, and Dana, if you want to chime in. Her and I kind of reviewing outstanding obligations. I just want to make sure that, look, if there's something we missed in there, like a small payment, we usually take care of all the big ones, but just something that we didn't see, just provides a little bit of buffer to allow for that closure.
Yeah, I had gone through it, I had just looked at the cash flows and our projections, and in each case where Kevin had suggested roughly how much that we would have to do a transfer, each one of them, his numbers were high, maybe 20, 30,000, based on also the same assumptions that I had seen. So again, the 700,000 would, should take care of all of the obligations for those three TIDs that are mentioned above.
And we're scheduled to close, and that's scheduled to close in 2035, 36?
TID 15 is scheduled to close in 2034.
So I have a quick question. So when you're doing these development agreements, what are you doing to ensure that the investments that you're making are gonna like help bolster it so it's not going negative?
What we're trying to do, and I think what we're talking about with the proposed addition of East Town, that TID, is that the creation of a TID is paired with a development agreement. And I can't speak for before my time, but I think one of the important things, like we did last year with University Avenue, is we knew the Festival Foods project and the G was ready to go, and the GABS project was almost there. And I think having those projects in queue before you create the TID ensures that, look, you create the TID and you got some value going on. I think there's an issue of creating TIDs, and that's why not recommending for 2017 doing Whitney School or the Shipyard, doing a TID without really having at least one major development project in queue. Because I think what happens is you create it and say, oh, you encourage somebody to come there, but all it takes is one big demo or one big acquisition by a nonprofit to put that thing in the hole. And I think that's what we're trying to prevent with creating new, and I think it's more on creating the TIDs versus the development agreements themselves. You kind of get what I'm saying? I mean,
No.
is that you want to have that development agreement queued up before you do the TID, so that you know, look, I create this TID, so I know next year that project's, and in this case for Easttown, it's underway. I mean, so there is going to be value being created. That is one of the things that we'll probably be talking about with the RDA next month, is for a development agreement for the Easttown Mall. If we're going to include that area in a TID, we've got to have that development agreement come to the next RDA meeting to ensure that that value goes up. So that we're not taking the mall down and all of a sudden we create a TID that's in the hole from day one.
Yeah, just looking at the three we just talked about, it looks like the neighborhood TIDs are a little bit challenging, because it's a fairly narrow,
Yeah, there's not enough.
there's just not enough, you don't have that big hitter opportunity, and you probably run more risk in terms of devaluation. I mean, and again, that's just something to think about when you think about Whitney School. Again, I
Right.
don't know, I just, for whatever it's worth, as you're thinking through, I'd be much more inclined to support Easttown than I would Whitney based
Sure.
off of what I'm looking at.
Well, and I think you could bring a point in terms of also the precision of these TIDs is, you're carving out, you can always add on or expand the district. I think one of the things, some of these are quite large, and look, some municipalities just, they do blocks upon blocks, which, yeah, you can get some increment, but you also risk, again, you take a large structure like a school or a mall offline, and you can wipe out what's the equivalent of 2 or 3 city blocks of housing.
Correct.
So I think, yeah, and that's one of the things I think, and maybe we can have some, I think with the process, have some further discussion on the boundaries of Whitney and the Shipyard, because they would include some potentially residential properties in there, how much and at what time do we include those?
Yeah.
So these are the three, recommendations to add into TID 12, and then just an update from our TID 16 reporting. Right now, the whole TID has a value of almost $230 million. This year it's probably going to gain another $12.5 million. That's from additions to Aurora and Strategic Behavioral Health coming online.
I do have the 17 values if you're interested.
Oh, okay. You've got the
So-
17 ones complete?
So in terms of the number 12, that is scheduled to close, I'm assuming somewhere around 2032, 33?
That is scheduled to close in 2025. That is a 20-year TID because it's an industrial
Oh,
one.
okay, 2025. So is there any chance of closing that earlier? So I'm just thinking in terms of from our perspective, we allocate funds, and is there any opportunity to accelerate the closure of that so there's a benefit for the other jurisdictions? And I don't know if you need to be at 2025 to get your full benefit, or I'd
Sure.
like your perspective on
Yeah,
that.
so there is probably one more major project that's going to be coming
Okay.
through in the next few months.
Okay.
One of the things we had also looked at is, again, how do we set ourselves up for the expansion of the I-43? So I think if we have some cash available to be able to use that for some infrastructure improvements out there, Erie Road needs to be redone, and we we needed to extend sewer service and water service into that area to allow I-43 to continue basically east of Erie Road. Look, if we can pay cash for those instead of borrowing those, I think we have Public Works kind of working on the estimates for those right now. I think once we can get a cost to that, we can eye up and say, all right, here's how much it is, and then look at potentially, yes, ending that early.
I think that would be, that
Yeah.
would be of benefit from my perspective. I mean, I think there's a help on both sides. Again, I don't want to, impact opportunities, because again, you've built a nice surplus to
Sure.
do some things, but, if we close it in 2020, 2021, something along those lines, there's a little bit of an advantage that comes back online a little bit early.
And, since I've been around, they've been talking about closing this TIF for the last 8 to 9 years, saying that there's enough, and I know that it's a donor TIF. Do you know how much money has gone out of the TIF? And then how much has been set aside for administrative services?
There was an allocation amendment in 2011 where money was given to TID 13 for the Schreiber project. I'm trying to think, there were two
Well, that's about $5 million.
draws out of it. Yeah, I think one was like for 3 and another one was for 2.
Or 4 and 1.
Yeah, 4 and 1.
Yep.
You know that, I don't know if this is a proper place to bring. Okay. Okay.
Sure.
So what would the process be to determine what that potential close date? I mean, is that something you'd need a month for, or 2 months? Is that something that you could define prior to bringing that forward? Could we put something contingent? Again, I don't want to crimp, but I also want to make sure that we're,
You just have to make sure it cash flows, and you can
Correct.
set this money aside and close it.
yeah.
It's-
But but again, it sounds as if there's some things they want to do to set themselves up for others, which I'm certainly open to within reason.
Yeah,
Sure.
But if you're gonna create another TID, that's the whole thing, is
Right.
the TID should be able to come into development.
Yep.
So you're not just giving developers excess money that
Mhm.
they don't really need.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that might be something too, just looking at how I-43 expands, pay for some infrastructure improvements out of this, close it, and then if a new TID is necessary for kind of that future projects, or
Right.
like you said, kind of paying for their own as the increment comes in, paying for that, that could be a solution to be able to, incentivize kind of the further development, further ease.
But you don't have anything on the horizon, so you mentioned 3 new TIDs, and I-43 extension wasn't one of them.
Correct. And that would be, I think, looking at, like, as I said, potential project coming through the next few months, we kind of determine, it's kind of the transition between, closing out TID 12 and perhaps doing a new TID.
Okay.
Or you could do like an overlay.
Correct.
Close it out,
Yep.
and so you can keep some of the increment.
Mhm.
Be an easier way of doing it, and
Correct.
doesn't harm
Mhm.
it, but so we can still close it and just.
Correct. And I think, again, even with this outlay, there's almost $4 million in there right now, so take
Right.
another 700,000 off. Just what preliminary assessments, that should be more than sufficient to cover some of the improvements that we're looking at, and get it closed out.
Okay.
Really. And I think both from the county and your perspective,
Yep.
closing that out would be quite beneficial to all the
Yep.
taxing jurisdictions.
Exactly.
Any other discussion?
Did you want to see something, we can bring something forward more formally too, to say, you're kind of looking for a timeline of when we might be able to close it?
Yep,
Okay.
I would. I
Sure.
just think that'd be helpful, because I
Sure.
think from our perspective, if we are working to get the dollars moved around to help the city, there's also, again, we want to work together.
Yep.
Yeah, it'd be nice that, if you're gonna use 12 to be another donor TIF again, to say, okay, we're gonna approve this, but at the same time, we're approving the closure of 3, so we're just
Sure.
done. So it's not, we're approving something, and then
Yes.
6 months from now, it's like, yeah, let's just keep this open.
It's a gift that keeps on giving,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so.
okay. Yeah, but maybe by our next meeting, I can provide some more details and timeline and just
Okay.
when we can do that.
So the action, so coming out of here, you know, as you bring it back, would that language be in there that we would look to close? Or, I mean, what I'm trying to figure out is,
Sure.
do we need to approve it, or do we need to provide
Guidance.
guidance and direction on what is in a,
I think for public record, you'd probably want to provide some guidance, so it'd be like a motion to have City of Green Bay staff bring forward a proposal to close down TID 12, make the payments to TIDs 6, 11, and 15, and also close those down at the same time. So it's all encompassing.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's fair in terms of bringing back, look, some expenses for these allocations, but then just kind of the final project cost of
Mhm.
here's what we would spend money on for the infrastructure and be able to shut it down in 2019, 2020.
Fair.
perfect, thank you.
Sure.
So is that your motion, Bob?
I think it was,
Oh, it's not my motion, I give examples.
I think it's Chad's, unless you don't want that to be your motion. I'll let it be my motion if that's amenable.
Second?
Citizen members, step up.
Why don't you make, can you read it again though too, because Chad did so fast.
Sure.
Basically, at the end of the day, what we're asking them
Sure.
to do is we're just asking them to come back with a proposal that actually shuts down TIF 12, also out of TIF 12 makes the payments to TIF 6, 11, and 15 to make them whole so they can shut it down. So we're not trying to take any money out of
Sure.
12, we just want to shut down. And we want that to happen at the same time. So we want them to make the transfers and shut the 3 down so we know that they're shut down,
Sure.
and then also shut down 12.
Gotcha.
So we don't want to create some structural hole for them and all them cause a problem. We want to keep them whole.
We want to accelerate the closure to 12. That's what we're trying to do, is
Yeah.
accelerate the closure.
That's, yeah.
And Kevin, you're good with that overall, or?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
you know, again, I think the 12 has served its purpose. You know, it's
And
done
I'll
its work, and I
second it.
think,
It's a big success.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But for clarity, you would be looking at the same time, close 12, the same time you'd close the other 3.
I think what we do is we just come back with.
Yeah.
Okay, at least
some-
he can give a
That's
recommendation.
that's why I changed it to accelerate the
Okay.
closure, because I think the way you were talking is it sounds like all of them are closed at the same time. I want to give the city reasonable, we've had the conversation.
Sure.
A reasonable time frame to accelerate it. We don't want to, again, put too many restraints around it. However, sooner versus later would be
Yep.
great. So-
So,
That-
Second, yeah, thank you.
All approved?
Aye.
That passes. Next item is consideration with possible action of the creation of a tax increment financing District 19. It's for the Easttown, East Mason, and the adoption of the project plan pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 66.1105.
all right. I had sent you originally a copy of the project plan. I'm sending you, there's a red line copy. I made some additional technical changes. So they're red lines to you, are noted in there, and I can go through them. I just wanted to kind of give a little overview of ultimately kind of what we settled on as proposing for TID 12, which is outlined in your packet. So basically, we are looking at the Easttown, East Mason area, generally south of Mason Street, east of Main Street, north of Auto Plaza Way, and then west of the Wilder Park subdivision. In short, just kind of, here's the boundary we looked at, basically from the corner of Mason and Main, back through covering Cub Foods, Easttown Mall, back to the Shopco and Aldi. So primarily a very auto-centric commercial plot of land, and really identifying this area, what was developed in the 1980s, had some improvements to the area in the 90s, a few again in the early 2000s, but a lot of these structures in here which have identified, really aren't at their highest and best use. And especially like all that parking out there, it's vastly underutilized. So there's a lot of not only redevelopment potential, but new development potential if you want to look at this as a gray field. Generally, right now, there's a PUD covering the area, so the underlying zoning, there's still some residential in there, commercial, even a little light industry, but the PUD basically was established to allow for the construction of the mall. Really also was put in place for the signage that allows for these off-premise signs. So you have the big East Town pylon signs on Mason Street and one on Main Street. But as you can see, the land use right now, I mean, it's commercial. I mean, this is a commercial area. When you go out there, I mean, it's meant for commercial uses for shopping. And what we've identified, we'd like to propose this as a rehabilitation / conservation TID, where we identify some parcels that are in need of rehab or conservation work. We've identified those, and really there's only a handful of parcels in this area. That's the old Royal Cleaners or the Hot Now site, the U-Haul building, which was formerly Kmart and the Rogan Shoes, the Cub Foods building, and the East Town Mall. Those are ones that we feel are identified really kind of haven't been their highest and best use. Also, again, contain significant amounts of parking that are ripe for additional development. So this is the boundary that we have proposed. It's just about 60% need of rehabilitation work, so it meets the 50% threshold. So I don't know if you want to start, or if there's any questions or concerns about the proposed boundary of this TID.
To me, the boundary looks pretty tight. I mean, there's not a lot, there's really not a lot there. Just out of curiosity, though,
Sure.
it looks like a mud hole behind Hobby Lobby.
That kind of like flange that sticks down, or
Yeah, what's, I mean, that looks like that's kind of land.
yeah.
Blocked if you
So it's land that kind of serves as a buffer between the auto dealerships and the residents. The auto dealerships in the west and the residents in the east. You can't really do a whole lot with it. There's a potential you could turn it into some stormwater management, or use it as some green space, which I think initially why it was done this way is so that they could get their green space requirements without impacting any of their parking. So that's why it was carved out. You can't really build on it or develop it, so for the most part, it'll probably remain that way. I think, look, there's some opportunity, again, for some stormwater or some type of, public amenity, if, to go in and revamp the theater, use that backspace, you could use it there, but otherwise, there's no structural use for it.
And I apologize for this question because I thought this was just an organizational
Sure.
meeting. What's the value on this parcel or this piece then?
So for on the East Town piece, or all in?
Just on the East Town.
So the East Town Mall, it's 2 parcels. The total value, all in, is probably about $7.5 million. So I know that there's a separate case right now challenging assessment of the property. But we built the projections in here are the city's values, and the applicant or the developer is challenging trying to get a lower assessment, but we built the pro forma assuming that these would be the values, that these values would be upheld. If it does go lower, I mean, that's only to benefit of the TID district in terms of additional increment, and I did confirm with DOR if they do get changed that those values will be reflected. It's not going to get a hit on us because they're looking at the 117 values. But the challenge is, if you look at the mall, the Hobby Lobby, the Petco, I mean, are doing very well. It's the rest of the mall that's really junk.
So is this TIF more so or the TID more so, because Hobby Lobby's, seems like that's not going anywhere, Shopko, Aldi's, U-Haul, they just did. Cubs, it looks like you guys are, someone's building something in there right now?
Yeah, so we have a development agreement with a developer to do the Cub Foods. This parcel was not in a TID. And located in a development agreement was a process for us to either A, create a new TID or expand TID 10, which is Main and Mason. We looked at, just given potential for additional development, that creating a new TID here versus expanding the boundary of TID 10 was preferable. That is also the same reason we are waiting, or we need to get a development agreement done for the East Town Mall. If that is not the case, then we will have to look at the boundary for this and not include that. But I think we're on track to get a development agreement done for that, where they'll at least guarantee that that value will not go down, so that the base value remains the same. We don't put ourselves in a hole.
But when you do your development agreements, you're requiring them to guarantee a certain level of
Correct.
increment, right?
So, and in
Are they
this
doing-
case,
Are they doing personal guarantees still, or not anymore?
no, and for the Cub Foods deal, it is a pay-go. So that one is not much of an issue. The Easttown term sheet, they have guaranteed a certain assessed value. So if it comes in below, they say they will pay whatever the taxes are, and they will pay actually 110% of our required debt service.
And someone looked at their financials? and
Yes.
that were
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
So what is just to clarify, the Cub Foods, is that the building right next to Kohl's, to the left of Kohl's?
Yes.
Yep. So the Cub Foods is this building here.
Okay.
This is the old camera. This is the U-Haul, Rogan Shoes. This is
Yep.
Cub Foods. This is the Easttown Mall. Kohl's is a separate entity, separate
Okay.
parcel, but Easttown includes the Hobby Lobby and the Petco. And then to the east is the Shopko and the Aldi.
Okay.
So if we were to do this TID, how much increment do you think there will be?
So, based on, and that's the very last page.
Like I said, I apologize.
No, that's fine. Pro forma, right now, it's about,
Kevin
thought
could
you
answer
said-
that. I do know I know most of the answer. He asked what's going in Cub Foods. It's
Oh,
gonna be,
what's going
turn
in
out,
Cub
it's gonna be
Foods?
4
yeah.
retailers,
Marshalls.
which is like a TJ Maxx.
Yeah.
Right, it's
just
the
that.
other, the
Okay.
sisters.
All right, I saw the construction, I
Yep.
had not heard anything. so-
Ross, PetSmart. Yeah, 'cause
Yes.
Petco's here. so
Yep,
it's
they're gonna
PetSmart.
have-
I saw the pets, okay.
And then there's a fourth tenant that they're still working on securing. It's just like 2,500 square feet.
Sure.
It's a small
Okay,
store.
thank
So
you.
are you taking, and I'm just, this is just more of a general question with just kind of the challenge in retail space. Is there anything that you look at as just the challenges of this location over time, over a 25-year horizon? Is there,
Yeah.
is from a development standpoint?
Yeah, so a few things. One, I think the mall concept, look, it's
Right.
dying.
Yeah.
And so as we look at these the challenges, can we do things that, look, can be easily repurposed? And I think a lot of retailers now are going to, you call them, I guess, a mid-box size. They're not the 60, 70, I mean, the Cub Foods, only 60,000 square, they're going to smaller increments. And I think that provides some more flexibility. More people are doing things online, but still people return stuff and they like to have outlets to go. And so I think one of the things that we're looking at is if it is going to get carved up, is there another future use for it? Is it easy to kind of like plug and play another retailer, another use in that, or convert it to something else? The mall, that structure itself, it's really hard to undo, but look, the developer's willing to do that. And I think one of the things we're looking at is, all right, if we kind of turn that mall inside out, and the reason for including, these parcels down the line that include the parking lots is, there's enough room to kind of fill back in and put a grid in and kind of make this neighborhood center.
So you're looking to utilize the parking lot space to build other standalone establishments of restaurants or?
Correct. And I think the initial development is to get the structures done, but I think
Right.
it's been made clear, especially with a pay-go incentive,
Yep.
is that you provide some additional development, on the outlots.
Right.
That's
So it becomes like
additional
the
increment, and
Paneras,
there's
the-
room there, and I think, because it's a PUD, we have some flexibility with parking requirements, and again, kind of a park once, walk around kind of
Right.
thing. Those are some of the things that we see anticipated there. I don't see it out of the question, I mean, maybe not initially, but Long-term, if you look at places like Bay Shore and Whitefish Bay or Hilldale, in Madison,
Yep.
these were the same things at one
Correct.
time. I mean, they're
Right.
outdated shopping malls, and
Yep.
they transformed themselves into, a new retail center that has housing, office, and other amenities in that. And I think this is, the start of that is getting some of that retail going in this area.
So is there anything in the works on this U-Haul Tires Plus Citgo area down in? 'Cause-
No, and I think, look, I mean, just given the zoning and kind of by right, I mean, U-Haul was fit to go in there. I think that's, look, I mean, they've made improvements, and I think, look, they've taken a blighted building, the Kmart, and made it look a lot nicer. But in terms of just, storage and vehicle rental, I mean, we, as a city, feel that's a great interim use, but ultimately, there's probably a higher and better use.
Yep. Okay.
And I'm sorry, one last question.
Sure.
On the East Town, is there anything defined for that East Town per se? Is that?
So that's one of, that came through council at the end of last year with the term sheet. One of the things they talked about, kind of the same thing with Cub Foods, basically turning them all inside out, doing some national brand retailers. They had talked with the county about potentially using that back space for the county library. That is not gonna happen. And I think, look, we're still working with the county to try and figure out East Branch where that may go. Nobody just say it couldn't go like in a parking lot out here. But they would like to come through, as I said, probably in the next few weeks with a development agreement that shows, all right, here's what we'd like to do with that. And they've been kind of playing around with the mix and match of tenants. Given, that Cub Foods is moving along, look, retail, good retail attracts good retail, so it's just a matter of them getting the right spaces configured to do that.
Okay. Good.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
And how long is this one gonna go until?
So this is a proposed 27 years, and just, get back to your question. Right now, a base value of just under 25 million. And just on the projections, anticipated growth of just, I just ran 1% a year, just for some small and minor improvements. Basically, the biggest projects coming on, those are on page, the red line copy there on page 13. The Cub Foods will be adding about just under $7 million of incremental value, that remodeling. And then the East Town Mall will be adding just over $10 million of incremental value. Again, I think those are pretty conservative estimates from what we've looked at for build-out. Generally, we come in a little higher, but I think those are pretty good. And again, if depending on the base value assessment, those could be a little higher, and depending on outlot building,
Yeah.
those could continue to be higher
Is
as well.
that really is kind of your ace in the hole, is kind of the outlet building development?
Yes.
That's not factored in.
Yeah, I mean, Diana looked out there, I mean, even on Black Friday, I think is not full.
Right.
And so there's a lot more room, and the infrastructure's in, I mean, in terms of
Correct.
other utilities and services. Yeah.
So
there's a lot-
relatively low investment, primarily incentives and.
Correct. So, I don't know if there are any other questions on the boundary. Just in terms of then, Mr. Matthews is talking about, in terms of projects or incentives, I think, initially in the term sheet, we had looked at some potential upfront money for East Town just because of the massive demolition involved there and some infrastructure work. Otherwise, again, you try and do pay-go incentives where you can. I think that is in terms of, getting some additional development here. Other project expenses, we could look at long-term, identified some pedestrian bicycle enhancements, basically just making it easier to get across Main Street and Mason Street into this area. You've got a ton of population, to the north and in Preble Park and to the west. But just getting some safer crossings into that area. Potential use of funds for, as you mentioned, kind of stormwater improvements, or potential, again, public amenities. If you look at some of these developments, these neighborhood centers, they might have a small square plaza or things in terms of being some public benefits. So, as I call it, Dad has a place to sit where Mom goes and does all the shopping. So,
Is the infrastructure on the front end? I mean, do you need to do the front end work, or is this really more as it develops, you're just putting some funds aside? Or are
There-
you spending those on the front end?
They're right now anticipating saving up for them,
Okay.
not doing any improvements up front. I think the one that we had talked about is if the library were to move forward somewhere in this area,
Mhm.
that would be the one that relies most, especially when you talk about like kids or seniors, on providing some improvements to get crossings across Mason and providing some infrastructure within. I think once these projects are up and moving, I think that you would look at maybe improving that kind of secondary street, south of the restaurants on Mason. That would be the logical next step. But until there's a project, I don't see, I think we just wait.
I'd just be, I mean, the only thing I'd do is I'd be cautious because, we're giving money to TIF 6, 11, and 15, and it seems like the theme is, TIF money was used for those type of niceties, and it didn't really bring value, and now we're bailing those TIFs out, so I would just, that's an editorial comment.
Sure.
Don't need to respond.
No, but I think it's important though that those are kind of on the back end rather
Yeah,
than,
that- that's why I asked the
leading
question.
with them.
If you're spending them on the front end and you don't recognize the value, I mean, again, a lot of it depends on what you develop, and quite honestly, it depends on which retailers you draw.
Right,
I mean,
right.
if you draw a certain cachet, then you probably have to clean it up a little bit too.
So with that, I guess, yeah, other in the project plan, the other thing that I did, update with Diana is just on page 9, just our 12% test. Right now, we're at about 5.2, adding this TID would put us up to about 5.6%.
So the 4.5 million, do you know how much of that you have earmarked for the first two projects? I mean, is that
So-
line share, or do you?
Sure,
select
yeah,
quite a
for East, for the Cup Foods, we have a development agreement. That is all pay-go. We anticipate it's probably gonna be about 1.2 to 1.5, depending where that comes in terms of their eligible expenses. What they've listed in terms of just their infrastructure improvements, in terms of just the demo and
Mhm.
build-out work. As for Easttown, the term sheet had 2 million up front with another potentially up to $1 million, I think, on the back. We're gonna be revisiting that in the development agreement because I think some of that money was contingent upon the library going, and I think we wanna, see what may be there. So with that, I think, we're probably gonna hit 4 to 4.5 of that. But again, most of that money is in the pay-go. And so I think in terms of also structuring some of these deals, it's making sure that, look, the development is going to cover it, or in the Easttown case, if we do do money up front, that we're requiring a debt service payment plus 10%.
Right.
So in terms of just like there's some cushion there in case we take a hit in equalized or
Mhm.
rolling, real estate values will go down for a year or two.
I guess all I want to do is anticipate the whole amendment piece that says I've already spent all my money and now I've got this great idea to develop my the outbuildings and
Sure.
you need to come back for money. I'm just trying to understand if it's all spent and it's all factored in here.
Just in the, initial projections, I would say there's still some room in there if it's going to create over this time period in terms of like cash flow, of a balance. With this development, it'll probably be about $12 million worth of cash created. The projects here identify, I think, like 9.5. So in terms of, there's still some cushion in there in terms of additional room. And I think one of the things that we try and do also is even in some of our later TIDs, that there's still a percentage that goes back to the city. Even if we are doing pay-go and we can be aggressive on that, there's still a cushion, 20-25% that still comes back into the TID, to kind of save up for some of these other projects.
So do you anticipate that you'll need to provide incentives to develop the parking lot area? I mean, is that typically what you see, or there's enough of a?
So I think it will, it will depend on the project as it comes forward. I think if we're going into a new TID and we have PAYGOs in place, both Cub Foods and Easttown properties, I mean, consume a lot of parking lot.
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things we've talked about is if we don't have a cap on there, then that's on the back end. I mean, the only cap would be, eligible expenses.
Mhm.
That's incentive for them to do something sooner than later because there's time ticking down on, being able to recoup some of that benefit.
Mhm.
So I don't anticipate that. And I think part of the reason would be, look, you're using some of the money you set aside, then if there's other public infrastructure improvements, that would be the time to use that money to do some of those, maybe to create some sidewalks or
Mhm.
curb cuts
Mhm.
to do that. I think the, exception would be, is if, again, we're to look at maybe a public facility like the library that we think
Mhm.
could bring additional public benefit to that
Sure.
area and really making that, like, that's a solid then destination.
Mhm. Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, probably tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like I said before, I thought this was more of an organizational meeting, so I didn't really have a chance to dig in as what I
Okay.
normally would. But it's nice that they're finally doing something with the east side. It's been a long time. So, yeah, that's what-
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, the neighborhoods out there deserve that, and it's been a challenge trying to get the right people in to take the investment and get some things moving there.
So the next step then would be for that public hearing, RDA and the city council to take action, and then they'll come back to this board as a resolution to pass.
Yes, so our meeting today, and then RDA is holding their public hearing on Thursday. The resolution will go to council on Tuesday, September 19th, and then we will need to have our final meeting. We can have it a little earlier, but I was looking at the following week, either 26th, 27th, 28th. We just have to have it before the end of September so we can get our materials in to DOR the 1st of October. So I don't know if you want to look at a calendar. I mean, you can pick a day, or I can have Deanna kind of call and arrange another meeting.
Doodle works really well.
What's that?
Doodle works really well.
Okay.
It's kind of nice, actually.
Which one?
Doodle poll.
You just throw a bunch of dates in there and everyone checks where they can do it. And that way someone's
I've
not
never
wasting
seen
their
that.
time.
26th and
Going around.
28th are better for me than 27th, but
Okay.
if we do it in the afternoon again.
Okay.
So on number 3, do we want, is there a motion? Consideration with possible action on the creation of a tax increment financing district number 19.
I'd either just receive and place and file, because you can't take action on it until you have a proper resolution before you. So,
Okay.
or you could direct them to bring back a resolution, so either receive and place and file or bring back a resolution.
Okay.
But at least that's what my recommendation would be,
Is that what you're,
So is there a motion
Well,
to
that's not
receive
my
and place?
motion, bro.
Yeah.
come on. You're killing me.
Citizen member, step up.
Is there a motion to receive and place on file? Or-
So moved, yes.
Or actually, could I would ask you not to receive, I apologize. It should just be to hold to the next meeting.
That's my motion to hold to the next meeting.
Sorry, because you don't want to receive it.
Yeah.
At the county, we receive and place everything on file, but here you don't, because technically you'd be kind of killing it, and that's not your
Right,
intent.
we have
Yeah,
additional
so I
steps.
apologize.
Okay, I have a motion to hold by Brent. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. All approve?
Aye.
Okay. Do we want to you said scheduled next meeting, we'll just have Deanna send something out.
Yep.
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
All approved?
Aye.